Unlike any other era, the 90s was a very experimental time for kids' television. A chance for writers and producers to flex their creative muscles and produce some of the most wild, bizarre, and imaginative ideas for children's entertainment, many of which have gone on to become timeless classics. One of the most successful shows to come out of this time period is one that I've talked about before on this channel, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. While certainly not the first to use it, it helped to popularize a very commonly used blueprint for kids shows at the time. A group of teenagers are given mysterious powers by an otherworldly phenomenon in order to battle a dark evil force, sometimes through stock footage, who is bent on taking over the world. In the wake of Power Rangers' sudden rise to fame, many imitators tried to capitalize on this new trend by creating their own version of the hit show, some of which even came from the same company that made Power Rangers. A few showed promise, like VR Troopers, Big Bad Beetleborgs, and Masked Rider, while others were a little hard to swallow, like Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog and Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills. Wow, that's quite a mouthful. But perhaps the most unusual and outlandish concept comes from a 1997 show that is simply called Van-Pires. To show you just how insane the 90s was back then, somebody woke up one morning and thought to themselves, hey, what if my car also wanted to suck my blood? Well, apparently the answer to that is you get Van-Pires, this crazy concoction of a show that sees 4 teenagers transformed into weird human vehicle hybrids and battle evil, fuel-sucking vampire cars in order to stop them from taking over the world. It was licensed and distributed by the Summit Media Group, a subsidiary of 4Kids Entertainment that also had a hand in localizing the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh anime shows to Western audiences. Okay, so full disclosure, I have no clue where the idea for this show even came from. As far as I know, it never aired here in the UK, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't even know it existed until very recently, so I have zero knowledge of what to expect going in. The only thing I could tell from the introduction was that it was going to be a strange mix of live action segments and CGI animation, which was becoming popular at the time thanks to shows like ReBoot and Beast Wars. Even then, I have no idea what is in store for me, so let's start off by looking at the first episode, Those Who Have the Fuel Shall Rule. We're quickly introduced to our main protagonists, Axel, Snap, Nuke, and Rev, in this really weird opening scene. Everything is in slow motion for some reason. Axel has this incredibly creepy look on his face. I have no idea what Rev is laughing at, and Nuke is just way too excited for whatever class this is. Dude, it's math class, you're not at a Steel Panther concert.
Don't forget to read chapters 3 through 6!
Yeah, speed read!
These are our heroes, everybody, acting like a bunch of jerks to their teacher. And get a good look at the classroom while you can, because aside from one brief scene near the end of the series, we never see it again. I guess this show thinks it's too good to have its own Miss Appleby. No, instead of a classroom, this is where our heroes like to hang out, the Sunrise Salvage Junkyard. And get used to it because it's the only live action set we get to see throughout the majority of the series. Sure, we hear about other places and even catch a glimpse of them now and then, sort of, but for the most part this is where our main characters like to hang out. Fixing up cars, playing games about cars, and just talking cars in general. Trust me, we'll get to that later. They also hang out with the owner and squatter of the junkyard, an aging hippie by the name of Van Helsing, who apparently got his name while being a roadie for the Rolling Stones.
We were a roadie with the Stones, and when Mick came down with laryngitis, they threatened to pull the gig and cancel the tour. Then the band looked at you and said,
Helsing, Van Helsing.
Sure, that's not an arbitrary way of keeping things on the vampire theme, but why is it the Rolling Stones and not the more obvious Van Halen? Still, I know more about him than I do about any of the main characters. They just all seem the same to me. You've got the dude, and you've got the other dude, then you've got the black dude, and finally there's the girl dude. Seriously, I'm way more invested in the old man that lives at the junkyard than any of these people. Anyway, the teens hear something strange coming their way, and discover a random meteor is going to crash into the junkyard. In a panic, they take refuge in some of the vehicles they've presumably been fixing up. Instead of wiping out all of civilization and plunging Earth into another ice age, the meteor just crashes into the junkyard and comes to rest at a nearby cemetery. Due to the meteor's, cosmic rays, the teens emerge having been transformed into human car amalgamations. Rather than freaking out about the horrifying changes their bodies have gone through, you know, like a normal teenager. They take to their new forms relatively well and decide to head out for a test drive.
I got me a car and I got me some gas. Now everyone else just kiss mine.
However, the meteor also brought some derelict cars to life, transforming them into the titular creatures known as Van-Pires, led by a former pickup truck named Dracula, who is clearly a pale imitation of ReBoot's Megabyte. He's joined in his underground lair by his henchmen, a former hearse named Cadaver, a former ambulance called Ambula, and a former ice cream truck named Automaniac. There's also for some reason a toaster skateboard thing that has a French accent, and a toilet that sounds like somebody doing a bad impression of Rodney Dangerfield.
Quit the paddling and apply yourself! You're an appliance, aren't you?
Well, that's the story of my life. No respect. I got no respect.
Dracula leads his forces in an assault on the city in order to suck the gasoline out of innocent cars. The teens spot this happening and decide that they need to do something about it.
I don't see any other mutant, teenage, auto, cyborg, power, morphin' thingamajig speeding around up here, do you?
That line right there tells you exactly what this show's trying to do. Capitalize on a popular trend. They're not even trying to hide it. Our heroes quickly find out though that just like the Van-Pires, they need gas in order to survive. So they make a quick pit stop.
Thanks a lot, Nuke, but we're not stealing anybody's gas. We pay our way.
Wait, now suddenly you have morals? From the same guy who was rude to his teacher earlier? Also, how did your wallet survive the transformation? The gang gets back into the fight and sends the Van-Pires packing. Rather easily, in fact. However, as the sun begins to rise, their systems start to lock up. So they quickly dash back to their cars and change back into their human forms. Realizing that the Van-Pires are still out there, Helsing convinces the teens to continue the fight and christens them as the Motivators, sort of becoming their unofficial mentor. I love this final shot here as Helsing slowly backs away as if he's just realized what he's done. Oh no man, I think I've started a cult! That was the first episode of Van-Pires, and it pretty much sets the stage for the rest of the series. The teens have some arbitrary problem that they have to resolve when Dracula comes up with a new plan to take over the world. The teams hop into their car fins and transform into their CGI counterparts in order to battle him, before turning back to their live action forms with their problems having been resolved. Rinse and repeat for about 13 episodes. By the way, you might have noticed that the effects on this show are extremely bad. There are terrible green screen effects everywhere you look, shoddy special effects that any YouTuber with a basic knowledge of editing can recreate, we'd even manage to hide it off screen before the big reveal, and most notably some horrendous looking CGI animation. I mean, it is really dreadful looking. Some of the designs are kind of interesting, but the way the animation flows is incredibly awkward. There are lots of instances of entire shots being repeated in multiple episodes, even when the dialogue doesn't match up. There are even parts where the animation doesn't make any sense at all. There's this one scene where I'm sure Rev is supposed to jump out the way of two cars so that they crash into each other, but the animators must have forgotten to add Rev into the scene, so these two numbskulls just crash into each other for no reason. Just for a frame of reference, this show came out at the same time that Beast Wars was still airing, and admittedly, while that show's animation hasn't aged particularly well, it's practically Picasso compared to Van-Pires' crayon scribblings. In fairness, it's not the worst CGI out there, but it's not far from it. As for the acting, well, let's just say it's definitely not going to be winning any awards anytime soon. The performances are either really over the top, or the actors are being given no direction with what they're doing. At times it often comes across like a strange improv show, except there's no Colin Mockery to help make it hilarious.
Sandpaper!
Of course, that's only when you can hear them, because the sound mixing on this show is really bad. Yeah, I may be one to talk, but believe me, I was having such a hard time understanding anyone. Either the background music was too loud, or everyone just kept on talking over each other. It's as if they only had one microphone set up during filming and didn't bother to move it in between shots, as sometimes the actors sounded like they were miles away.
You got 365 miles to go before you hit that 16th lap.
I don't know if I can keep the emergency brake on for a whole year.
Couldn't they have fixed it in post with ADR or something? Of course, when you can actually hear them, you're met with an endless barrage of car-themed dialogue. But I don't just mean car puns, no. Every other sentence they say has to have something to do with vehicles.
This is all my fault. It needed more support.
Get off that freeway, Axel. It could have happened to any of us.
You put me behind the driver's seat, and I ran you into a brick wall.
Axel, haven't you heard of no-fault insurance? It was an accident.
Yeah, dude, don't let it run you off the road.
No, I blew it, big time.
I know I should have expected it, seeing as the show is called Van-Pires, but by the 4th episode, it was really starting to tire me out. I mean, it was driving me up the wall. I mean, damn it, now I'm doing it. Even the names of the episodes aren't exempt from this torture, with titles like Bad to the Cone, Tailpipes from the Crypt, A Few Good Cars, and Unleaded Zeppelin. Aside from the endless car puns, the characters themselves end up being too one-dimensional, and any character development is either one and done or just really confusing. Rev has a very tomboy-like personality, but it's hard to get a lead on her motivations. There's one episode where she complains about how the other guys don't take her seriously because she's a girl, a typical storyline for the time, but then there's another episode where she complains about them not treating her enough like a girl. In fact, it becomes a key part of the episode as Dracula hypnotizes Rev into marrying her, and all it takes is for Axel to call her a girl for her to snap out of her trance. Speaking of Axel, while he's technically designated as the leader of the team, he doesn't really do much in the way of leading except for giving the call to arms. There was one episode where he quit the team after an accident, and while granted it was because he nearly dropped the heavy engine on top of one of his friends, 1, it wasn't entirely his fault, and 2, he just spends most of the episode feeling sorry for himself while his friends fight for their lives against a vampire tank, only to just suddenly stop moping about and join in to help them. Aside from one episode where Dracula turns him into a mindless zombie brute, there isn't much I can say about Nuke. In battle, he's often the strongest member of the team, even taking on the Van-Pires all by himself, but other than that, he just sort of fills his role as a member of the team. According to the Wikipedia page, he supposedly has feelings for Rev, but I didn't notice anything like that in any of the episodes. As for Snap, I kinda found him to be the most annoying member of the team. Sure, his lines didn't have as many car references jammed in like the others, but the way he spoke and his mannerisms just painted him more as the token black character of the team. The best character by far is Van Helsing. Not only is he the most memorable character of the show, he looks like he's the only one who's really having any fun with his role.
Mr. Sing? Van. Mr. Van Sing. He'll sing. Who'll sing? I'll sing. You'll sing. Thank you, I will. Excuse me while I kiss the sky.
Even if some of his lines are more than a little bit questionable.
But before I hit my bunk, I'm gonna commune with my junk.
While he mainly stays at the junkyard, watching out for the motivators from the safety of his, for the lack of a better term, command center, he does occasionally venture out himself when he needs to, often putting himself in danger in order to help out the others. He's the only one I really root for whenever I see him. Plus, he clearly has great taste in music.
I'm talking about Hendrix, Morrison, The Who. Who? Not Who, The Who.
The weirdest thing about him though is the fact that apparently he's credited as playing himself. I couldn't find anything online about who played the character, but something I did come across is a rumor that he was actually played by an uncredited Gary Oldman. I don't think this is true as there is no substantial evidence that backs up this claim, but wouldn't it be the most hilarious thing in the world if it was? Speaking of the music, one thing the show does have going for it is its soundtrack, which as you can imagine is very heavily rock influenced. The main theme has a chilling vibe to it that helps to promote the supernatural elements of the show, and low-key has a pretty sweet guitar riff too. And almost every episode has its own unique song that plays out during the end credits. It's honestly a really good soundtrack, but you won't believe who they got to help write and perform. None other than John Entwistle. As in former bass player for The Who, John Entwistle. He even released a soundtrack in the year 2000 under the album Music from Van-Pires, which was his final solo album before his death a few years later. No wonder Helsing flipped out on that delivery guy. I bet Gary Oldman loves The Who. Sadly, Van-Pires didn't really have that much staying power. It only lasted for one season and had a total of 13 episodes. Annoyingly, it didn't even have a proper conclusion. Its last episode, Uncool Fuel, had the motivators rescuing Snap from the Van-Pires and seemingly destroying them by breaking through their roof and letting sunlight into their lair. I say seemingly because we don't actually see them getting killed, and also the teens are strangely not affected by the sunlight themselves, even though they are technically vampires in their own right. Even more confusing is that at the end of an earlier episode, A Car is Born, in which Dracula creates a son that is subsequently named Alucard, because Dracula reference, there's a montage of some of the highlights of the show, including some parts that come in later episodes. I genuinely don't know if I've watched them out of order or not because that's how I found them on YouTube and that's how it's listed on the Wikipedia page. Even if this was supposed to be the last episode, it still doesn't end on a definitive note. I just have a real pet peeve for when a series just ends without any proper resolution. Well, despite my complaining about the abrupt ending, I can see why the show was laid to rest. It was attempting to put a darker spin on a formula that was, by that time, already starting to wear out its welcome, even with the show that it was most well known for. The best way I can think to describe it is like trying to blend together Power Rangers and the most popular CGI shows at the time, with just a splash of Buffy the Vampire Slayer thrown in for good measure. Unfortunately, the resulting cocktail doesn't come out with that greater flavour. It has terrible animation, poorly constructed special effects, paper-thin stories that can often be confusing, and acting that feels like it was given almost no direction whatsoever. Though I will admit I did have a lot of fun whilst watching it. This is just the sort of show that I would have absolutely loved as a kid, and I'm sure it has its fans somewhere out there. Unfortunately, it passed me by, and I can't look at it with the same nostalgia goggles as those who grew up with it. It was enjoyable while it lasted, but for me, I think this series has truly taken its last ride.